What if I told you that the retirement you're picturing right now, the one where you finally stop working, travel a little, spend time with grandkids, and just breathe, might not exist for you at all? Not because you're bad with money, not because you didn't try hard enough, but because of a system that quietly shifted the entire burden of retirement onto your shoulders decades ago, and almost nobody explained the rules of the new game. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why so many hardworking Americans are walking straight into a retirement crisis. And more importantly, what you can actually do to make sure you're not one of them. Before we get into it, if you find this valuable, hit that like button and subscribe to the Daily Finance so you don't miss what's coming later in this video, because there's a turning point in this story that changes everything you think you know about retirement. Let's start with a simple question. Why did your grandparents' generation seem to retire so much more easily than yours? It wasn't because they earned more money. In many cases, they earned far less than people do today. The real difference was the structure surrounding them. Back in the middle of the 20th century, a huge share of American workers were covered by something called a pension, formerly known as a defined benefit plan. Under the system, your employer took on the responsibility of saving and investing money throughout your career. And when you retired, you received a guaranteed paycheck for the rest of your life. You didn't have to pick investments. You didn't have to worry about market crashes wiping out your savings the year before you retired. The company carried that risk, not you. But here's where almost everyone gets it wrong when they think about what happened next. Pensions didn't disappear because companies became evil overnight. They disappeared because the math stopped working for employers as people started living longer. Healthcare costs rose, and global competition made it harder for companies to guarantee decades of future payments. So, starting in the late 1970s and accelerating through the 1980s and 1990s, businesses began shifting toward a completely different model, the 401k. And this shift is the hinge point of everything we're talking about today, so keep this in mind, because we're going to come back to it. A 401k sounds similar to a pension on the surface, but it is fundamentally different in one critical way. Instead of your employer guaranteeing you an income for life, you are now responsible for contributing your own money, choosing your own investments, and hoping the market performs well enough by the time you need to retire. In other words, the risk that used to sit on the company's shoulders got quietly transferred onto yours. And most people never got a manual for how to actually manage that risk. Now here's something that surprises even people who follow the news closely. This wasn't a small, gradual side effect. It was a massive structural change to how an entire country funds its old age. Within a couple of generations, America went from a system where employers guaranteed lifetime income to a system where each individual worker is essentially running their own personal pension fund, usually with little to no financial education, often while juggling a mortgage, trust kids, student loans, and the daily cost of simply living. And when you understand that shift, the retirement crisis stops looking mysterious. It starts looking like the predictable result of moving all the risk onto people who were never trained to manage it. But that's only the first piece of the puzzle. There's a second, equally important piece, and it involves the program most Americans assume will always be there for them: Social Security. Social Security was never designed to be someone's entire retirement income. It was built in the 1930s as a safety net, a floor beneath people, not a ceiling they could comfortably live under. Even today, Social Security typically replaces somewhere around 40% of a person's pre-retirement income for an average earner. That means if you are earning a comfortable living during your working years, Social Security alone is likely to leave a very noticeable gap between what you used to earn and what you'll actually receive. Here's where things become much more interesting. According to projections published by the Social Security Administration's own trustees, without changes to funding, the combined trust funds are expected to face a shortfall in the early to mid-2030s. That doesn't mean Social Security disappears completely. Payroll taxes would still fund a significant portion of benefits. But it does mean that unless Congress acts, future retirees could see reduced payments compared to what's currently promised. This single fact alone should tell you something important. The safety net that many Americans are quietly relying on as their main retirement plan was never meant to carry that weight alone. Its long-term funding is already a known, publicly documented challenge. So now we have two systems working against the average American at the same time. Pensions largely vanished, replaced by do-it-yourself investment accounts. And Social Security, while still functioning, was designed as a supplement, not a full replacement for income, with its own long-term funding questions hanging over it. But even this isn't the full story yet. There's a third factor, and it might be the most overlooked one of all. That factor is human behavior itself, and this is where the story gets personal, because it's not about policy anymore, it's about psychology. Federal Reserve Survey data has consistently shown that a significant portion of American households approaching retirement age have set aside far less than they would need to maintain their current lifestyle. His isn't because people are careless. It's because saving for retirement requires something the human brain is genuinely bad at: prioritizing a distant, abstract future self over urgent, concrete present-day needs. When rent is due this month and retirement is 30 years away, the rent wins every single time, even though the compounding cost of delay is enormous. And this is exactly where the concept of compound interest becomes the quiet villain or hero of this entire story, depending on how early you start paying attention to it. Imagine two people. One starts investing $200 a month at age 25. The other waits until age 35 to start investing the exact same $200 a month. Assuming a long-term average market return, historically averaging somewhere in the range of 7 to 10% annually before inflation for a diversified stock portfolio. The person who started 10 years earlier can end up with dramatically more money by retirement age, often nearly double, despite contributing the same monthly amount for a shorter total number of years once you factor in how much longer their early dollars had to grow. This is not a hypothetical trick. It's simple math, and it's the single most important reason financial educators keep repeating the same advice. Start early, even if the amount feels small. But what happened to an entire generation of workers who didn't get this message early enough? That's the story playing out across America right now. And it's why so many people in their 40s, 50s, and even early 60s are quietly panicking behind closed doors while still smiling in public. This is one of the least discussed aspects of the retirement crisis: the emotional toll. People don't post on social media about feeling behind on retirement savings. They don't bring it up at dinner parties. It stays hidden, which creates a false impression that everyone else has it figured out, when in reality, an enormous number of people are dealing with the same quiet anxiety. Now, let's bring in a real-world pattern that economists and financial planners have observed for years, because it illustrates just how much timing and circumstance affect outcomes, even for people who did everything right. Consider workers who were in their late 50s or early 60s during the 2008 financial crisis. Many of them had been diligently contributing to their 401k for decades, watching their balances grow steadily. Then, within about 18 months, stock markets lost roughly half their value at the low point. Workers who had planned to retire in 2009 or 2010 suddenly found their account balances cut dramatically, right when they had the least amount of time left to recover before needing that money. Some delayed retirement by 5 or even 10 years. Others retired anyway, but with significantly less income than they had planned for. This is what financial professionals call sequence of returns risk, and it's a concept that barely anyone teaches the average worker, even though it can completely reshape someone's retirement outcome based purely on timing they had no control over. This is exactly why relying on the stock market alone, without any strategy for reducing risk as retirement approaches, can be so dangerous. But here's the part. Almost nobody explains clearly. The solution isn't to avoid the stock market altogether. Historically, avoiding the market entirely has cost people far more in lost growth than market crashes ever have. The real lesson is about having a plan that adjusts risk over time, something professionals often refer to using target date strategies or gradually shifting a portfolio's mix as retirement approaches. Understanding this one concept alone puts you ahead of a huge percentage of the population who either invest with no plan at all or avoid investing out of fear. Let's pause here for a pattern interrupt, because there's a myth we need to destroy right now, one that convinces otherwise smart people to make poor decisions. The myth goes something like this: I don't make enough money to invest, so I'll start once I'm earning more. This feels logical on the surface, but it quietly ignores the earlier lesson about compound growth. Someone earning a modest income who consistently invests a small percentage, starting in their 20s, can often outperform someone earning significantly more who starts investing seriously in their 40s, simply because of how many additional years the first person's money had to grow. Time in the market has historically mattered more than the size of any single contribution. This doesn't mean income doesn't matter. It absolutely does. But it does mean that waiting for the right moment to start is often a more expensive decision than people realize. Now, here's a question worth asking honestly. What does all of this actually mean for someone watching this video today? It means the retirement crisis isn't really about one single cause. It's the combination of a structural shift that moved investment risk onto individuals, a social security system that was always meant to be supplemental and now faces its own funding questions, human psychology that naturally favors the present over the future, and market timing risks that most people have never been taught to manage. When you stack all 4 of these factors together, you get exactly what we're seeing across the country: a large percentage of Americans reaching their 60s with savings that fall well short of what they need. But I promised you earlier this video wouldn't just be doom and gloom, and this is where the story turns, because understanding a problem clearly is always the first step toward solving it. Financial planners often point to a few practical anchors that can dramatically shift someone's trajectory, even later in life. One of the most powerful is simply increasing your savings rate gradually over time. particularly by directing raises and bonuses toward retirement accounts before your lifestyle adjusts to that extra money, a concept sometimes called paying yourself first. Another is taking full advantage of employer matching in a 401k whenever it's offered, because that match is essentially an immediate guaranteed return on your contribution that you cannot easily find anywhere else in the financial world. Turning down a full employer match is, in a very real sense, turning down free money that was already earned through your work. There's also the often overlooked power of catch-up contributions, available to workers aged 50 and older, which allow people to contribute more to retirement accounts than younger workers can, specifically designed to help people who got a late start make up ground during their highest earning years. This is one of those policy details that barely gets discussed publicly. Yet it can meaningfully change outcomes for people who spent their 30s and 40s focused on kids, mortgages, or simply surviving paycheck to paycheck. But here's the detail that changes everything for a lot of people once they hear it clearly. Retirement doesn't have to mean a single dramatic finish line where you go from full-time work to zero work overnight. Many financial educators now talk about phased retirement or semi-retirement, where someone gradually reduces work hours, takes on part-time or consulting work, or delays claiming Social Security by a few years. And this last point deserves special attention, because it's one of the most underused strategies in personal finance. For every year, someone delays claiming Social Security benefits past their full retirement age. Up until age 70, their eventual monthly benefit increases. This means someone who can afford to wait even a few extra years can end up with a meaningfully larger guaranteed income for the rest of their life, which is one of the few truly risk-free ways to increase retirement income available to the average person. This is where things become much more interesting, because it reframes the entire conversation. The retirement crisis isn't a single unsolvable wall. It's a series of decisions, some made decades ago by the entire economic system, and some still available to be made by individuals today, that combine to determine someone's eventual outcome. Understanding the system that's working against you isn't meant to make you feel hopeless. It's meant to help you see clearly enough to make different choices than the ones the average person, operating without this information, ends up making by default. Let's slow down for a moment, because there's another piece of this puzzle that almost never gets the attention it deserves: healthcare costs in retirement. Most people budget for housing, food, and maybe some travel when they picture their retirement years, but medical expenses have a way of quietly becoming one of the largest line items in a retiree's budget, especially once you factor in things Medicare doesn't fully cover, like most dental work, hearing aids, vision care, and long-term custodial care. Fidelity has published estimates for years suggesting that a typical retired couple should expect to spend well into six figures on healthcare costs throughout retirement. And that number tends to climb over time as medical costs generally rise faster than overall inflation. This is exactly the kind of expense that catches people off guard, not because it's hidden, but because it's easy to underestimate when you're decades away from needing it. But here's a fact that surprises a lot of viewers when they hear it for the first time. The cost of long-term care, meaning assisted living or nursing home care later in life, is generally not covered by Medicare in the way many people assume. Medicare covers short-term rehabilitation in certain circumstances, but ongoing custodial care, the kind many older adults eventually need, typically falls outside its coverage. This has pushed many families toward either purchasing long-term care insurance earlier in life, when premiums are lower, or simply setting aside dedicated savings for this exact purpose. This single blind spot has derailed the retirement plans of families who did everything else right, because they built a plan around income replacement without fully accounting for the cost of care. Now, here's a real historical pattern worth understanding, because it explains why so many people feel like the goalposts keep moving. Life expectancy in the United States has generally increased over the past several decades compared to when Social Security and many pension systems were originally designed. When these systems were built, the average retirement period was expected to be considerably shorter than what many people now experience. Living longer is obviously a wonderful thing, but from a purely financial planning perspective, it means retirement savings often need to stretch across 20, 30, or even more years, rather than the 10 or 15 years those older systems were originally built around. This is precisely why financial professionals frequently mention something called the 4% rule, a historical guideline suggesting that withdrawing around 4% of a retirement portfolio in the first year, then adjusting that amount for inflation each following year, has historically had a strong chance of making savings last through a multi-decade retirement. It's not a perfect formula, and many planners today discuss more flexible variations of it, but it illustrates just how much longer retirement savings now need to last compared to previous generations. This is where things become much more interesting, because it connects directly back to something we mentioned earlier, the shift away from pensions. A pension guaranteed income for as long as you lived, no matter how long that turned out to be. A 401k or IRA does not have that built-in guarantee. If you live longer than expected and run through your savings faster than expected, there's no automatic backstop beyond Social Security. This is exactly why some retirees choose to convert a portion of their savings into an annuity, a financial product that can provide guaranteed income for life in exchange for a lump sum, essentially recreating a small piece of what pensions used to offer automatically. Annuities aren't right for everyone, and they come with fees and trade-offs that deserve careful research, but understanding why they exist helps clarify just how much the retirement landscape has shifted the burden of longevity risk onto individual households. Let's introduce another surprising angle that rarely gets discussed on finance channels: geography and cost of living. Two people can retire with the exact same amount of savings and have wildly different outcomes depending on where they choose to live. Someone retiring with a modest nest egg in a lower cost of living state or region may comfortably cover their expenses, while someone with the same savings in a high cost of living metropolitan area might struggle significantly. This is one of the more empowering pieces of this entire conversation because, unlike market returns or Social Security policy, where you choose to live in retirement is largely within your control, some retirees relocate specifically to stretch their savings further, and this single decision can sometimes matter as much as years of additional saving. Here's a pattern interrupt worth sitting with for a second: debt. Carrying significant debt into retirement, especially high-interest debt like credit cards, dramatically changes the entire calculation because every dollar going toward interest payments is a dollar that isn't supporting your lifestyle or your longevity. Financial educators consistently emphasize entering retirement with as little high-interest debt as possible, and ideally with a mortgage that's paid off or nearly paid off, because a paid-off home removes one of the largest fixed monthly expenses most households carry. This is another example of a factor that isn't about market timing or luck. It's about a series of deliberate decisions made in the years leading up to retirement. Now, what does all of this mean for someone watching today who feels like they're behind? It means the picture is more nuanced than "you failed" or "you're doomed." It means there are multiple levers: savings rate, employer match, catch-up contributions, delaying Social Security, managing healthcare and long-term care exposure, choosing where to live, and eliminating high-interest debt that all interact with each other. Nobody needs to pull every lever perfectly. But understanding that these levers exist at all puts you in a completely different position than simply hoping things work out. So let's bring this back to the very beginning of the video, to that uncomfortable image of a retirement that might not exist for you. The reason so many Americans are genuinely at risk of never fully retiring isn't because of one villain or one mistake. It's the quiet, compounding result of a pension system that vanished, a Social Security program that was always meant to be a floor rather than a ceiling, and now faces its own long-term funding questions, human psychology that resists sacrificing today for a distant tomorrow, and market risks that catch people off guard precisely when they can least afford it. But once you understand each of these forces individually, they stop being invisible, and once something stops being invisible, you can actually respond to it. Starting early, capturing every dollar of employer match, using catch-up contributions if you're behind, managing risk as you approach retirement instead of ignoring it, and considering strategies like delaying Social Security are not complicated secrets. They're available to almost everyone, yet most people never hear them explained clearly and calmly, without hype and without fear, until right now. If this video helped you see your own retirement picture more clearly, I'd genuinely love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you are in this journey, whether you feel ahead, behind, or somewhere in between. Because these conversations matter more than people realize, and your experience might be exactly what someone else watching needs to hear today. If you found value in this video, make sure to like it, subscribe to the Daily Finances, and turn on notifications so you never miss the moment we break down the next major financial topic, shaping your future. Because what we're covering next might change the way you think about money just as much as this one did.